you know what tomorrow looks like. Not because you planned it, because it looks exactly like today. Same time to wake up, same hours exchanged for an amount that covers what needs to be covered, and not much else. You're not failing. That's the strange part. By every external measure, you're managing. But managing and living are not the same thing. And somewhere in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, it's possible to feel very clearly that time is passing and you are watching it go from a place you never quite chose. Almost 80 years ago, a song described this feeling in a single line. It sold 1 million copies in 3 weeks. That song, 16 Tons, when was it written? The 40s? Something like that. Johnny Cash recorded a version. It showed up in Mad Men, and just this year, in the finale of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. A medieval fantasy series decided to close its first season with a song about a coal miner who works his entire life and ends up owing more than he ever earned. Someone thought that made sense. And it did. There's a number that gets thrown around, something like the majority of workers spending everything they make before the next paycheck arrives. Could be wrong, could be exaggerated, but even if it's half that, you probably know enough people where that's true to make it feel real. And the question that keeps coming back is that happening because people don't know how to handle money? Or is it just what working looks like now? Load the tons, get another day older, somehow end up deeper. A song from almost 80 years ago shouldn't still feel this current, and yet. There's something that happens when you spend enough time inside a routine that doesn't change. You stop measuring life in events. You start measuring it in weeks, in shifts, in the distance between one Friday and the next. And somewhere in that rhythm, time goes by. Not dramatically, not with any particular moment you could point to and say, that's when it changed. It just goes. The thing nobody really prepares you for is how normal that feels. How easy it is to look back and realize that the last couple of years look almost identical to the ones before. Same situation or close enough, same kind of work, same calculation at the end of the month. You weren't miserable, you weren't happy either. You were just there. And then comes the part that's harder to sit with. Because if the last few years looked like this, what's the argument that the next ones won't? Not a guarantee, not a certainty, just a pattern. Quiet, consistent, and patient enough to wait for you to stop pretending you haven't noticed it. And then, something changes. Maybe a better month. Maybe just a little more than usual, sitting there for no particular reason. And instead of relief, something closer to unease arrives. Because you don't quite trust it. Not in a paranoid way, in a quiet, learned way. You've seen this before, and you remember what came after. So you wait. And while you wait, you notice something else. That there's nobody to call who would actually understand what this feels like. Not the having more, the fear of losing it again. The specific loneliness of carrying something you can't quite explain to anyone who hasn't lived it themselves. People around you have their own weight, you know that, so you don't say anything. You just hold it, the fragile good thing, alone, waiting for the moment it goes back to what it was. Because it always does, or it feels like it always will. After enough of this, improvement stops feeling like progress. It starts feeling like a longer distance to fall. And somewhere along the way, hoping starts to feel more dangerous than just not expecting anything at all. At some point, and this happens slowly enough that you don't notice when it starts, the uncertainty stops being a circumstance. It becomes a way of moving through the world. You stop making plans that extend too far ahead, not because you're pessimistic, Because experience taught you that plans made in a good month rarely survive contact with the next one. So you shrink the horizon. This week, this month if you're feeling steady, rarely further than that. And what's strange is that this starts to feel like wisdom, like you've learned something other people haven't. That counting on things is how you set yourself up to lose them. That staying close to the ground is the only way to make sure the fall doesn't hurt as much. But there's a cost to that. A life lived that close to the ground doesn't leave much room for the things that require believing something will still be there tomorrow. Relationships, projects, the version of yourself you keep meaning to become when things settle down. Things don't settle down, and that version of yourself keeps getting postponed into a future that never quite arrives. And sometimes, in the middle of all that, you catch yourself thinking that at least a different kind of pain would have a shape, something you could point to, something that made sense of how bad it actually feels.
Another day older and deeper in debt.
There's a particular kind of damage that doesn't show up anywhere. No visible mark, no event you can point to, nothing that qualifies by any official definition. Just years. Years of not quite having enough, of not quite being able to rest, of carrying something that nobody around you can fully see. It doesn't arrive all at once. It accumulates in the things you stopped trying, in the ambitions that started feeling almost embarrassing after enough time passed without anything changing, in the moment you realized you'd stopped being surprised by your own situation. That's maybe the heaviest part. Not the struggle itself, but the version of yourself that quietly stopped expecting more and can't quite remember when that happened. So here's the thing nobody says directly. This isn't a personal failure. Not entirely. The idea that anyone can build something meaningful from any starting point, with enough effort, enough discipline, enough willingness to sacrifice, that idea requires a very specific condition to be true. It requires the system around you to be at least somewhat neutral, to not be actively consuming everything you manage to produce. And for a lot of people, it isn't neutral. The starting point matters. The network you were born into matters. The neighborhood, the school, the people who could or couldn't absorb the cost of your mistakes while you figured things out. All of it matters, and none of it was your choice. That's not a reason to stop trying, but it might be a reason to stop measuring yourself against a standard that was never designed with your situation in mind. The song said it 80 years ago. Work all day, end up with less than you started, and somewhere along the way, stop belonging to yourself. Start belonging to whatever is paying you just enough to keep showing up. And the question that never gets asked loudly enough is, what if that wasn't an accident? What if that was just how the weight was always distributed? And what does it mean that we're still recognizing ourselves in it, like it was written yesterday?
I owe my soul to the company store.
There's an idea worth sitting with. The idea of owing yourself to whoever is signing your checks. Not just your time, not just your energy, the part of you that decides what matters, what you'd rather be doing, who you are when nobody is asking anything from you. And here's the thing, the hours are real. The exhaustion is real. The years that pass the same way are real. But that part, that one, isn't automatic. It has to be given. You can work inside a system that takes almost everything and still not hand over the last thing. The opinion you formed quietly, the thing you made that nobody asked for, the hour you spent on something that will never pay you back. Those things exist outside the calculation. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe it doesn't fix anything. But there's a difference between a life that consumed you completely and a life that consumed most of you, while something small and stubborn and entirely yours managed to survive it. That difference might be the only one worth fighting for. Nobody chooses this. Not really. You don't wake up one day and decide that this is the life, the one where the weeks blur together and the plans keep getting postponed, and the good months feel more dangerous than the bad ones. It arrives gradually, through decisions that each made sense at the time they were made. And the hardest part isn't the situation itself. It's the suspicion, quiet, persistent, difficult to shake, that this might just be it. That the next few years will look like the last few. That the pattern is patient enough to outlast any attempt to break it. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. But somewhere between accepting everything as it is and pretending none of it is real, there's a version of this that at least knows what it's dealing with. Not optimism, not resignation, just clarity. If any part of this felt less like a video and more like something you've been carrying around without a name for it, you probably already know someone who's been carrying it too. Send it to them. And if you want to keep looking at the things nobody says out loud, we'll be here.